Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Football Fix Game Week 28 live stream. I am FPL Nacho, and I am really looking forward to getting into this live stream because, first and foremost, it isn't a deadline stream, which means that you guys don't have to watch on while I panic trying to do my transfers ahead of the deadline. So this is going to be a much more of a relaxed live stream where we're going to go through some hot topics going into this Game Week 28 deadline. Of course, we're going to be looking at the Fantasy Football Fix website, covering the algorithm points. We'll be looking at the Elite 11. Some managers that have activated their wildcard, so it's going to be a great chance for you guys that are currently on their wildcard to see what some of the best managers in the world are doing with their teams. Again, as well, we're going to be looking at some player comparisons. Importantly, those Chelsea defenders, because I know a lot of people right now, off the back of that double game week in 28 that's been announced, people are looking to move into these assets. So I want to pinpoint who is first and foremost the best asset to target, and then whether we should actually be looking to bring in Chelsea assets. Maybe you're looking to sell a Liverpool defender or not. So we have got plenty to cover in this live stream. So shout out, guys, in the chat. Please do drop in if you have any questions throughout the live stream. And if you do enjoy it, really would appreciate a like on the stream. And if you haven't already, make sure you do hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out any of the content between now and the end of the season, because we have so much coming your way. Rio, I hope you're doing well. As I mentioned, dropping questions, really do appreciate it. You've mentioned about Che Adams being a good option as captain. We're going to be covering captaincy a little bit later on, looking at those algorithm points, determining who might be the best pick for Game Week 28. So we'll be coming on to that one. Matty, hope you're doing well. Talking about captaincy again, we'll definitely look into that. And nuclear atoms, regular, obviously, listener. I hope you're doing well, buddy. And Tom, of course, thanks for jumping in. So we have lots to cover, guys. So much to cover. And again, please do drop any questions that you do have in the chat throughout. Of course, as usual, I will open the floor to everybody at the end of the live stream, but it doesn't mean that I won't pick up questions throughout the live stream. But first and foremost, I want to touch on the fixtures coming up, just because, as we know, Game Week 28, 29 are both double game weeks, and then Game Week 30 has officially been announced as a blank game week. We had the FA Cup games over the last 3 days, which has now confirmed the fixtures that we do have. So I've got here the fixture analyzer on Fantasy Football Fix, and I've filtered it by basically the best fixtures, as you can see, Wolves at the top there, down to the worst fixtures based on teams. So we get a real idea of which teams we should be targeting over the next 3 game weeks. Now, of course, it's a lot of chips being activated over these next 3 game weeks. I know Game Week 28, for example, is very popular with the bench boost, but equally, managers playing their wildcards. And we know Game Week 29 is going to be a particularly interesting time for those that have their triple captains available, with that Liverpool double that they have. Mo Salah away to Brighton and Arsenal. Could that be the best time to triple captain him? And then Game Week 30, we now know that there's 4 fixtures in there. Spurs, West Ham being the last ones to be confirmed in Game Week 30. Really interesting to see if managers are going to use their free transfers to get to Game Week 30 and build a team, or they're going to be playing their free hit in Game Week 30. Again, guys, let me know in the chat what your strategy is. But as you can see here, based on these fixtures now over the next 3, Wolves have by far the best fixtures. A double game week in 28 we knew already was favourable, and even that away fixture in game week 29 looked great against Everton. But importantly, these assets have fixtures in game week 30 against Leeds. Now, of course, Leeds a week ago probably looked a bit more favourable under Bielsa. With the new manager in charge, this could bring a new lease of life to Leeds, so that could be a tougher fixture than we first thought on paper. But Wolves still remain, if you're on the strategy of not free hitting in game week 30, probably one of the best assets to target over the coming game weeks. And I know a lot of you right now are probably thinking, Chelsea, double game week in 28, that's really where I want to put my investment. But again, that is all going to be determined on what your strategy is. If you are not free hitting in game week 30, we know that Chelsea blank in game week 30. So although Rudiger is obviously a great defensive move into those teams, you do have to understand that he will not play in game week 30. Whereas the likes of Saiss, even the likes of Connor Cody, are going to give you that double game week in 28, the same as Chelsea, but also that extra fixture in game week 30, which we know is so important if you're not playing your free hit. So again, just a word of caution there. If you are really getting drawn in by those Chelsea assets, just remember Wolves still a very good defensive outlet and offering that game week 30 opportunity that Chelsea don't necessarily offer. Now, just running through the other ones, guys. Leeds, we know that double game week in 28 is very attractive because a lot of people are talking about Rafinha getting the captaincy for game week 28, but 29 looking just as good at home to Norwich. And again, Wolves away in game week 30 is just going to give you a fixture that you can play with. Villa, Arsenal, Spurs, Leicester, another bunch of teams that play in game week 28, 29, and importantly 30. But the doubles along the way looking really attractive. And if you did have the likes of Son or Kane, originally we thought they were going to blank in game week 30. Now they're not. Makes them even more of an attractive asset. And I would probably urge managers to consider a double up of Kane and Son over the longer term because we know their fixtures are looking strong. And with those two being such talisman in those sides, I think there's definitely going to be returns for those two in the team. So just going to leave the fixtures up here, guys, just so you can check them out. Just remind yourselves of the fixtures coming up because there's so much to process right now in the FPL world. I really do like to kind of focus on blocks, and we know that the next 3 game weeks are guaranteed, and we can negotiate our chips, our strategy, and our transfers with what is ahead of us. That is the important thing there. Aditya, I hope you're doing well. Van Dijk to Rudiger for a point sit. Now, this is going to be probably one of the popular questions we are going to get on this live stream. So what I'm going to do here is the important thing. We're first and foremost going to determine, are Chelsea assets worthwhile bringing in? Then we're going to be looking at which Chelsea asset in particular you should target. And then thirdly, we're going to cover the topic of should you then sell a Liverpool defender like Van Dijk to somebody like Rudiger, Silva, James. So I think that's a really good question to kick this off because it is something that we know is going to be one of the most important topics going into game week 28 because of that double game week announcement that Chelsea have had for 28. So as I mentioned, guys, I brought up the Fantasy Football Fix comparison matrix here, and I've brought up 5 of basically the only fit defenders that Chelsea currently have. Now, you have to remember, Chilwell, long-term injury, out for the rest of the season. We think Christensen carrying a knock, therefore I haven't included him because we're solely looking at game week 28 for our transfers, and I don't think Christensen necessarily comes into that category now. And Azpilicueta, Tuchel's press conference today confirmed that Azpilicueta still hasn't returned fully to training, which kind of makes the attractions of Reece James even more tempting because we know Azpilicueta being almost the direct kind of competition for Reece James on that right wing back spot makes Reece James even more tempting in that position. So I've brought up the 5 main defenders that we need to consider: Rudiger, Thiago Silva, Alonso, James, and Chalobah. Now, quickly, just to remind ourselves of the Chelsea fixtures coming up. Double game week in 28 of Burnley and Norwich away. Really good defensive fixtures for Chelsea. We know that Burnley and Norwich, some of the lowest scoring teams in the league. Then a home game against Newcastle, which Newcastle, one of the form teams in the league right now, not necessarily going to be as easy as it seems, but still a good fixture that you would expect Chelsea defensive assets to do well in. And then, of course, that blank in game week 30. But what I do just want to do for you guys is just pan out the fixtures a little bit further, just to give you an understanding of how good Chelsea's fixtures are beyond game week 30, because we know that our transfers need to look a bit more long-term than just short-sighted sometimes. And I think with Chelsea assets, Brentford at home, Southampton away, and Leeds away off the back of game week 30 blank, I think that's worth considering as well, just in the back of your minds there. So that was just a quick recap on the fixtures that Chelsea do have coming up. Go get that coffee in, guys, just to give me that extra kick. So here we have, guys, the defenders that we are going to compare here. Now, as usual, for those that are regular watchers of the live streams and also obviously checking out the Fantasy Football Fix website, you can see that below the names there are a value which is associated to their projected points over the next 5 game weeks. And you can see Rudiger topping the charts right now out of these 5 Chelsea defenders at 23.2 projected points over the next 5 game weeks. Reece James, on the other hand, Thiago Silva is top of that list on 24.9. Then Reece James on 22.3, Alonso on 15, and Chalobah on 0. Now, I would take Chalobah's projected points with a pinch of salt, of course, carrying an injury, just come back from injury, and his minutes are really uncertain, so the projected points are a little bit skewed with Chalobah. Now, price point is an important factor for these Chelsea assets. Rudiger at 6.1 million and Reece James at 6.2 million kind of sit in their own bracket for themselves. Then we have the Silva versus Alonso bracket at 5.6 million, and then the budget pick of Chalobah at 4.7 million. Now, before we deep dive into some of the underlying stats here, looking at the minutes, the FPL points and shots, I personally think that we can already rule out Chalobah as a Chelsea defensive asset. Now, we know that he is a player that has broken into the first team over the course of the season, operating in the right centre-back position. But we know that when Christensen returns from injury, even when the likes of Azpilicueta does come back, his position is going to be heavily under rotational risk. And although he could be the differential that you want in this double game week because of the injuries to the likes of Christensen and Azpilicueta, I just don't think he's necessarily an asset that you want to have longer term. And I think when we do bring in Chelsea assets, you're almost at the assumption that you aren't going to have them for game week 30, but you want them beyond game week 30. And Chalobah is almost going to be a transfer waiting to happen. So although it might be attractive at 4.7 million, I'm going to rule Chalobah out as an option. I think there's better options available in the game at the same price or less, even the likes of Fabian Schär at Newcastle, who we know minutes are absolutely locked, similar amount of games. I just think he's probably a bit too risky of a pick. So I'm ruling Chalobah out before we even get into the list. That's apologies, guys, but that is going to be the final decision there. Let me know in the chat if you do have an argument for Chalobah. I'd be really interested to see it. So let's take a look at these underlying stats. Now, because the minutes are so skewed between these players, as you can see, Rudiger playing 1,000 more minutes than Reece James. I've decided to filter it by showing averages per game for us to get a real idea on how these players operate during each game. I think that's a better way of understanding each player as an FPL asset. So you can see there, points per game, 5.7 for Reece James, which is quite a considerable amount than second best Thiago Silva at 4.8, then Rudiger at 4.5, Chalobah at 4.1, alongside Alonso at 4.1. And the goals as well going in Reece James's favour, 0.3 goals per game, the others at 0.1 goals per game. And I would argue that Rudiger, Thiago Silva and Chalobah falling under very much the same umbrella from an attacking perspective, being almost set piece attempts that you are going to see from their shot volume as well. I think very much their goal potential is only going to be coming from deep line free kicks or corners. Reece James, on the other hand, we've already seen him score in open play, and his touches in and around the penalty box from open play means that I think he gets a few more avenues to goals rather than just set pieces. So that's why I think Reece James is a bit more of an attractive asset from an offensive perspective, because he just has that other string to his bow that the likes of Rudiger and Thiago Silva don't necessarily have. Now, FPL assists, again, no surprises, Reece James is leading the way on 0.3 here, being the right wing back in the team, and also having that phenomenal run that he did have, that purple patch midway through the season, really bumping up these underlying stats. There's no surprises to see that. And Alonso at 0.2 as well, again, an amazing offensive asset, Alonso. Just we know that he's questionable from a defensive perspective and how he hinders that Chelsea defence. Now, FPL bonus points, again, Reece James leading the way on 1 bonus point per game. Really attractive and something, again, that we need to take into our consideration when we're considering FPL defenders. Because as we know, Trent's, the Cancelos, absolute bonus point magnets. And when we're comparing players who are very similar price points, it can be those bonus points sometimes that really do separate them from being good assets and great assets. And I think that's definitely something to consider when we are looking at Reece James, because again, 1 bonus point per game averaging is a really great underlying stat to see there when you compare it to the likes of Thiago Silva at 0.6 and Rudiger at 0.3, for example. Now, the last thing I want to look at is shots, and you can see the trend here, guys. Reece James winning in each department here, 1.3 shots per game, but this one very, very much closer than the other departments. 1.3 shots per game for Alonso, but 1.2 shots for Rudiger. Now, again, I'd argue that this is slightly different shots. These are going to be headers from corners and free kicks. Reece James, on the other hand, is going to be a bit more of a mixture, going to be open play shots alongside potential similar situations to Rudiger. So it's worth noting that as well when we do look at the underlying stats. But the way I'm reading this right now, guys, I think Alonso, bit too much of a risk to bring into your FPL teams. His rotation is a worry there. I think the likes of Hudson-Odoi could operate on the left-hand side. We've seen Malang Sarr and Saul play on the left wing-back spot. I don't ever get the impression that Tuchel necessarily rates Alonso in his best 11. So although I think Alonso could roll back the years and deliver an unbelievable double game week, I just don't really think it's an asset that you want to bring into your FPL team. So I'm going to rule out Alonso alongside Chalobah. Now, you see these underlying stats for Reece James. It's impossible to not have him in the top 2 options for Chelsea defenders. So we're going to look at a straight shootout between Rudiger and Thiago Silva. And I think it really comes down to minutes rather than the underlying stats. Because as you can see here, Thiago Silva and Rudiger's underlying stats are really, really similar. I don't necessarily think that either are going to be dominating one another from a goals or assist perspective. I think it's going to be really level here. And you can see that from the projected points. But I think the fitness, the history that Rudiger has in this Chelsea team with minutes, he basically plays every game, kind of makes him that little bit more attractive as an asset and worth paying that 0.5 million more. Double game week for Thiago Silva. I fully expect him to play in both. But then the Newcastle game, we have cup games to include for Chelsea. And I think over the longer term, although Thiago Silva in this short-term period could match or outscore Rudiger, I think you're going to feel a bit more confident having Rudiger in your team as a minute security, because I think now and then Christensen can operate in that centre-back role. Rudiger, on the other hand, we know is absolutely locked in that left centre-back position, barring injuries. So, although he's slightly more expensive, I think it's going to be Rudiger versus Reece James in those Chelsea teams for your wildcard, your free transfer, or your free hit. Now, kind of preempted this as being the top 2 based on those underlying stats. So I've got a direct comparison here between Rudiger and Reece James. And just to remind you guys, over the next 5 game weeks, Rudiger is projected to score 23.2 points, James 22.3. So Rudiger is just a little bit more higher on those projected points than Reece James. Now again, we knew that the points per game was in Reece James's favour. And again, this is just a perfect idea for us to get an idea on the positions that they're taking up on the field and how that influences it from an offensive perspective, because we know that both of them are great for a clean sheet in this Chelsea team. So it's what they offer a little bit different going forward. And you can see already in that touch heat map for Reece James, unbelievable in that final third, really heavily involved in that right wing back position, getting touches as well in that right half of the box, but not as central as you would expect for the likes of Rudiger. You can see there, Rudiger, that is going to be very much down to set pieces. He is the target man for Chelsea alongside Thiago Silva on corners. No surprises that you are seeing that yellow heat map in the middle for him in that 18-yard box. That is exactly where he is getting his shot volume and attack on goal. So that is something definitely to consider when we are looking at Rudiger. Reece James, on the other hand, not necessarily getting those touches in and around the penalty spot that Rudiger is. But when we see that touch heat map for Reece James, how much more offensive he is than Rudiger, it is really difficult to look past Reece James as an FPL asset. And again, I just want to bring it down to the average statistics per 90 here. And you can see, offensively, Reece James dominating in every single department. 0.3 goals against 0.08 for Rudiger. Expected goals, 0.15 for Reece James. The shots on target, the shots in the box, all in Reece James's favour. So now the question comes down to this. Are you a risky manager or are you a defensive manager? Now, neither one is a bad thing at all. I personally think that both being at this price point right now, it really does come down to your risk appetite as an FPL manager. Reece James, I would argue, is probably a little less likely to play the double game week for 180 minutes, whereas I have absolutely no doubt that Rudiger is going to play all 180 minutes in game week 28. But I think if we do look at it as a longer term perspective, I fully expect Reece James to outscore Rudiger. And while Rudiger might win in the short term in game week 28, if you are looking at holding a Chelsea asset long term for these great fixtures, I think Reece James will eventually pay himself back in offensive returns and bonus points. So as long as you have a longer term head, I think Reece James is probably the better asset to go for. In particular, now that we know Azpilicueta is struggling with an injury, that could just mean that Reece James's minutes are going to have to be forced upon him in this double game week. So guys, that was a quick overview, or I say quick, on Rudiger versus Reece James. Let me know in the chat, guys, who is your pick out of Rudiger and Reece James? And is it somebody that you're even considering right now, or is Chelsea completely off the radar for you? Modric, you said about who to pick, James or Rudiger. I hope that helped you out there. I see a few other questions about those two. So hopefully that little section there has covered which direction you should go, Reece James or Rudiger. I think it is really down to what kind of risk appetite you have as a manager. Savio saying Willock or Fraser. I think that's really something we're going to cover in a minute as well in terms of Newcastle assets. Because a reminder, if you didn't know, double game week 28, double game week 29. So you need to remember that these options do become valid picks just based on the game time that they're going to have over those 2 game weeks. Anthony, we're doing well. Start Dennis or Foden. Well, looking at those 2 assets there, on paper it should be Foden, but I think Dennis is quite a shrewd pick as well. And again, we will touch on the algorithm points as well to see which route we should go down. And Alan said, can we see 28 by itself to see the fixture difficulty? Alan, I'll quickly bring that back for you, just so you can see game week 28 in isolation for you. I'll filter it just there. I'll keep this up for about 30 seconds just so you get an idea. But based on our fixture analyzer here, you can see from and again, this is worth noting, from an attack perspective, this is attack difficulty. Wolves top with their double, then Villa, Leeds, Southampton, Norwich, Chelsea, Newcastle, Leicester, and then Watford. What I will do is filter it by defence difficulty, because I know a lot of managers are looking for the Chelsea assets and how this does favour it. And when we do filter it by defence difficulty, you can see Chelsea jumping straight to the top with their fixtures, away to Burnley and away to Norwich, who again, I must reiterate, some of the lowest scoring teams in the league, and that is why they're top of the charts for the defence difficulty over game week 28. So I hope that helps, and hope that provides a little bit more insight into the fixtures that they do have. Nuclear Atom saying, what are the flaws in my wildcard team? Foster, Ramsdale, Tierney, Cancelo, Trent, James, Rudiger, Fraser, Salah, Ramsey, Coutinho, Rafinha, Adams, Broha, Kane. Only £2 million plan is Coutinho to Kulusevski in game week 29. Don't mind that team at all. You're getting the double game week for Ramsdale, and of course Tierney being involved in that. I would argue that Cancelo is going to be the one that you could potentially look to get rid of. I know it seems crazy, and I believe that he easily could be one of the best picks in the longer term. But I think Cancelo, with Man City not having any double game weeks, could be a cash cow for you to invest in other areas in your team if you wanted to. I think maybe the double up of Kane and Son is the only other avenue that I would consider for you. But if you are going down the Kulusevski route, going a little bit cheaper, it looks like he is locked in that team, then I don't mind the route that you're going down. But I think it's almost Cancelo plus Kulusevski, or maybe someone like a Fabian Schär in Newcastle plus Son. I think that's the route you need to consider right now. And so he's saying Willock or Havertz. Based on game time and the fixtures, I probably would go down Willock, a lot cheaper. You're getting 4 fixtures in the space of 2 game weeks. And I just think Havertz is a little bit more of a minutes risk for you. I think you can pay a little bit less and go for a safer pick in Willock. A name saying what to do with 2 free hits, wildcard and bench boost. I think I'll free hit this game week. Well, first and foremost, I need to ask you, how is your team looking for game week 30? We know the announcement for game week 30. Let me bring it up on screen here just so people do know. And if you didn't know, game week 30 is a blank game week. You can see that here in front of us. Leicester, Wolves, Leeds, Arsenal, Spurs, Villa, West Ham and Brentford. The only teams with fixtures. So if you're currently sat there with a team of players from Man City, Liverpool, Man United, Chelsea, I think a free hit in game week 30 first and foremost is going to be your priority for your team. Then with your bench boost available, I think potentially you could look at a later wildcard later down the season and then use your bench boost in game week 36, where the assumption is that we're going to have a big double game week then. Again, we only have assumptions right now, no concrete evidence at all. So it is just worth noting that, unfortunately. So keep dropping the questions, guys. Apologies if I don't get to them straight away. Again, this isn't a deadline live stream, so we're a bit more relaxed. We can take our time going through each hot topic and hopefully helping you guys come down to some difficult decisions made a little bit easier throughout the way. So I know a lot of managers right now are currently sat there maybe on their wildcard, or even if you're not on your wildcard, looking at different transfers to make going into game week 28. Again, if you just jumped on the live stream, we've just done a 15-minute section on Chelsea defenders and Rudiger versus Reece James. So I really urge you just to quickly rewind that and check that out if you've just jumped on the live stream now, because I see it's just jumped up. So this is a brilliant opportunity for us to check out the Elite 11 on Fantasy Football Fix, one of my favourite parts of the Fantasy Football Fix website. And if you don't know, the Elite 11 is basically just a combination of some of the top managers in the world. And it's an opportunity for you to track in real time their movements with their transfers, their chip strategies, and the best thing as well, notes from each game week that some of the managers do, just to get an insight into their decision making. Really do urge you guys checking that out on our premium membership. It's an amazing tool to check out. So Elite 11, I know that there are a couple of managers on here, in particular Mr. Black, who is activated as wildcard ahead of game week 28. And I think this is really going to benefit you guys who have activated their wildcard, just to get maybe some confirmation bias that you're going in the right direction, or it might offer some players that you haven't even thought about that you could consider in the back of your mind for your wildcard team. Because again, we have 17 hours and 2 minutes until that deadline, guys. You're going to get precise updates from me. Don't worry about that. So as I mentioned here, Mr. Black has activated his wildcard. And again, guys, with the Elite 11, it's a brilliant part of the website because you can activate email alerts and push notifications. So anytime a manager who you associate yourself with makes a transfer, you get straight away a notification so you know what they have done. Because some managers I know do like to track the movements of some of the best managers in the world. And we do certainly have some of those on the Fantasy Football Fix website. Now, again, I must really urge that take this with a pinch of salt right now, because again, we have 17 hours until the deadline. Example, Mr. Black here could easily change his decision throughout that time period. So just remember that this might be an absolute locked on team going into game week 27. You can see here that chips active are the wildcard for Mr. Black. And he's gone down a route of a Sar and Dubravka double up, which I would then argue that potentially a bench boost later down the line might be a consideration for him. A back three of Trent, Rudiger and Livramento. Again, we discussed Rudiger being probably one of the go-to safe picks in that Chelsea defence. And Alexander-Arnold almost selecting himself in the team, as we know already. And Livramento with Southampton, obviously not playing in game week 30, and makes him a little bit less attractive. But I still think he is a great option at that price point. And we know Walker-Peters slightly at risk of game week 28 with that injury. Livramento could be a really nice pickup for that double game week for him in game week 28. And in the midfield, Salah, Rafinha, Ramsey, Saka, Son. I think it's going to be a very popular midfield five. Ramsey offering you that brilliant price point in that Aston Villa team who have a double game week and importantly play in game week 30. Mo Salah is an absolute lock, as we know. And Son, now that he features in game week 30, showing that he's again a brilliant premium asset to hold over the longer term. Now, a few interesting picks in there, the likes of Geldhard, obviously being a bit more of a differential but budget pick that's going to free up funds available for the rest. And again, it's worth noting Mr. Black having 4 million in the bank here, so there's plenty of opportunities for him to invest in other areas. And I won't be surprised if this isn't the last iteration of his wildcard. Again, Ben White, a nice Arsenal pick there. Antonio, I think that might change. I wouldn't be surprised if that does change. But again, now that they have a fixture in game week 30, makes Antonio maybe that little bit more interesting to hold if you have him already. And then Cancelo as an option as well in that team. Again, I do think personally that there is a chance that Cancelo could be a player that we could sacrifice going forward. But again, looking at the average points that he gets per game, it's really difficult to move on from someone like that. I don't think it's necessarily an easy call to make for someone like Cancelo. So that's Mr. Black's team right there. Obviously, it can change. And I know another manager, Walter, has also activated his wildcard. So I think it's a really good chance for us to check out his team as well to see how it differs, what kind of alternative routes that he has gone down. Now, some familiar faces still again in the wildcard team. The likes of Sarr, Trent, of course, Rafinha, the Salahs, the Ramseys, Broha. But gone a bit different here and gone for the Kulusevski plus Kane combination. Now, of course, previous Mr. Black there not having Kane in it. Apologies. not having Kane in this side. I personally think that Kane, right now in the form that he's in and the underlying stats that he's producing, is a very difficult player to ignore if you are looking to wildcard in game week 28. And I really do think that Kane should be on the top of a lot of people's lists right now if they are wildcarding. The eye test, the underlying stats, the fixtures coming up make him a really, really attractive asset going forward. But Kulusevski, we've seen play the last 3 league matches. Really great underlying stats, and also from the eye test perspective, getting forward very similar to what Son does. I really do think that he is a nice alternative route if you can't go for Kane plus Son. And going for this route gives you the opportunity to invest in other departments. Coutinho is a really nice price point, and again, gives you that captaincy option in game week 28 for the double, but also a player that plays in game week 30. And interestingly, the double up of Broha and Adams, we know the double for Southampton in game week 28 is really attractive for them. But Adams, somebody who's slightly priced higher than Broha, not necessarily getting the love that Broha has been in the FPL community. That's mainly because of the price point of Broha. I think a lot of managers see him, the eye test always ticking along nicely, that you can save a little bit of money, go for Broha and save yourself in the cash department. But I really do think there is an argument to go for 2 Southampton forwards over this period. The only real shame is that they are blanking in game week 30. Otherwise, they would have been the ultimate assets to get longer term. So let me know in the chat, guys, what kind of picks would you go here? Do you disagree with any of the wildcard picks? I'd be really interested to know what sort of route you are going down in the wildcard department. And if you are playing your free hit in game week 30, in game week 28, let me know, because I think I'd be really interested to see as well what kind of players people are picking up in their free hits. I see Collins here saying here, Coutinho or Mount. I personally think Coutinho is actually probably the shrewd move to go for. I think his game time is going to be good for Aston Villa. The double for Aston Villa are decent as well. And I think Mason Mount, with Ziyech back in training, Havertz, the Lukakus of the world, I think Mount, although he is probably in Chelsea's starting 11, could easily get rotated in that double. I think Coutinho's minutes are probably a little bit more secure. So I probably would just go for Coutinho of the 2. And Gmail is saying, is Rafinha safe? Yes, I will be absolutely astonished if the new manager comes in and drops his best player in Rafinha. I think I'd be almost just, you're going to lose the fans straight away there. Rafinha, absolutely locked, and I think he's a great player for your fantasy teams in game week 28 and beyond. And Nikhil's saying, Coutinho versus James to captain with 4 days in between games and Azpilicueta's injury. Tempted to go James. Villa not looking as potent recently either. Yeah, I do agree that. I think that is a really interesting discussion to have. I think this is a great chance for us as well to go into the algorithm points for game week 28, because this is going to give us an understanding of which players we should be targeting for captaincy. Now, I'm going to filter it by game week 28 in isolation first and foremost, because we can have a discussion about Chelsea defenders, and we can look at captaincy options as well. So we can see that first and foremost, Sa, who I haven't actually seen in discussion much for captaincy, leading the way on 10.1 projected points. Now we know with their fixtures for Wolves, looking like a really good double up from a defensive perspective, at home to Crystal Palace and at home to Watford. Now, Palace, lively team as we know, and Watford as well with a double up of Dennis and King, could always pose problems. But I think Wolves would definitely go for at least 1 clean sheet over this double. They're still looking like a good defensive team, although it's worth noting their underlying stats have started to taper off over the last few game weeks, typical for those that wildcarded a few weeks back. But still think Wolves are good for their clean sheets, and I think Sa could be a nice move if you want to go a little bit different against the pack, against the likes of Coutinho's, Rafinha's and Salah captaincies. But you can see there, Thiago Silva leading the way in the Chelsea defenders at 9.9 projected points, Rudiger on 9.3, and Reece James back there on 8.9 for game week 28. Now again, it's worth noting it's all about your risk appetite. Some managers probably look at this and think Rudiger higher than James for projected points, and we know his minutes are probably more locked. So that probably means that Rudiger is probably your safer pick. But if you are looking at it from a longer term perspective, that's when I think Reece James will start to surpass Rudiger as an FPL asset. So again, it's really about your mindset and how you do view your transfer that you make in game week 28, if any. Now, your question was about Coutinho versus Reece James. Well, you can see there, based on our projected points, Reece James is actually leading the way against Coutinho. And actually, we have to scroll down a little bit to find Coutinho. I can't actually see him on this list here. Let's go to page 2 a minute. Coutinho, 7.6 projected points for Coutinho. Again, still decent projected points. We're not looking at a 4-point projected points here. There's only about a point difference between him and Reece James. So it's worth noting, I don't think Coutinho is a bad pick at all. I think realistically, you're looking at it this way. I think Coutinho's minutes are pretty locked in that Aston Villa team. Reece James, some might question the second game. He might struggle with minutes. So from that perspective, I think Coutinho probably does get the captaincy. I think Reece James in itself is going to be a nice differential for you. And then you can just have Coutinho as a locked minutes player. I say that, I'll probably curse him now and he won't even bloody play. But we'll see on that one. Let me know in the chat, guys, if you agree. George saying, I'm doing Rudiger for Cancelo and Rafinha for Bowen. Do I take another hit to get Adams for Weghorst as I'm bench boosting? Really interesting there. I'm not a big fan of similar to what Tom said there about you taking a -8 there. You're effectively selling Weghorst, who, yes, doesn't have a double game week, for Adams, who is looking solid and has a double game week. So I'm not against that one because, of course, when you get yourself a player like Adams, who we're assuming will play 180 minutes over the double game week, I don't view it as necessarily you taking an additional -4 because you'll be bringing in a player that should get 2 appearance points. So effectively, it's only a -2. And then you're backing that player to deliver for you in the attacking front. So I'm not hugely against that when you're selling a single game week player for a double game week player. I would say, though, selling Bowen is a bit of an interesting one just because he does play in game week 30. Rafinha, of course, does have the double game week, which makes him very attractive. But I think Bowen could still really tick along nicely for you managers that still have him. Will was saying, thoughts on Mendy, don't want to take out Trent, VVD or Cancelo and have 2 doublers. I don't mind Mendy at all. I think he's a nice pick. Of course, he's going to get guaranteed game time in this Chelsea team. And we can see based on the projected points here for Mendy, 8.7 projected points. Now, of course, that is going to be less than the defenders available. And his ceiling is naturally going to be lower than the defenders because unless he picks up penalty save or save points, he's going to tick along nicely for you with 6 pointers across the course of the season. Chelsea don't naturally concede many save points because their defence is being so good. So you're not going to be getting those monster hauls with bonus points for Mendy. So that's worth noting for you there. And at 6.1 million, with Reece James basically being the same price, I really would try and urge you to go for the Reece James option. I just think his FPL ceiling is so much higher. And I think you could go for a double game week goalkeeper in the likes of Ramsdale or Jose Sarr, who's $1 million cheaper almost, who has a projected points that's even higher. So I'll be tempted to go down that route and get yourself a Chelsea defender whose projected points are higher and have a higher ceiling for you to target. Let's quickly see some more questions, guys. Newcastle, wow, Nacho's already 4K, another top 10k finish to get 1-year extension at Fantasy Football Fix. Yeah, guys, that's it. I had my contract signed. It said if you don't get top 5k, you're booted. So the pressure's on, guys. No, of course not. But it is good to be in the top 5k. And it'd be interesting, guys, well, let me know in the chat, what is your current overall rank right now? And what is your target rank for the end of the season? Let me know in the chat, guys. Colin says start Kane or Ramsey. I have to say Kane here. I know Ramsey does have the double game week, but Kane, you will kick yourself if you bench somebody like Harry Kane. Has to be Harry Kane, 100% Colin. New Grams, Captain Coutinho, Adams or Rafinha. Well, based on our projected points here, we can see that Rafinha is currently projected to score 8.1 points, Adams 8.5, and Coutinho a little bit less on 7.5. So I think Adams is a really nice differential captaincy for you, and I wouldn't put you off going for that route at all. That's just based on our algorithm points effectively, so hopefully that helps there for you. Striker options that play in game week 30, George has said. So I really do think that this is a good opportunity to bring up the decision that I think now is in our hands that we didn't have a few game weeks back. Now, Spurs versus West Ham has been confirmed for game week 30 because of Spurs' exit in the FA Cup. Now, we saw a certain Jamie Vardy return in game week 30, and he is going to be a player that is going to be very difficult for us managers who are not free hitting to get to. Whereas those that are free hitting in game week 30, it's a brilliant opportunity to bring in an amazing FPL asset that we know historically does so well, who play Brentford, who I think could have a really good day at the office. Now, based on our algorithm points, and again, because it's a few game weeks away, the algorithm points can obviously shift and change depending on the coming game weeks and the underlying stats that certain players produce. But we can see Jamie Vardy leading the way on the underlying stats, the projected points for game week 30 at 6.4, Kane on 5.2. So to answer your question about looking at strikers for game week 30, I think if we're looking at the premium department and we want to start shifting our team structure from double premium midfield, cheap frontline to a premium forward, I think Jamie Vardy and Harry Kane have to be absolute top of the tree for our discussion. We know Leicester play 28, 29, 30 and beyond, and they have plenty of fixtures to rearrange that are going to be happening after game week 30. Kane, double game week, single, and then the single in the blank game week 30. So both really attractive assets. Now, it's worth noting, Jamie Vardy, of course, has had an injury-hit season. So when we do look at these stats here, Harry Kane has the larger data size. So I like to take conclusions from bigger sample sizes, of course, but 1,300 minutes of Vardy isn't minuscule. We can come to some conclusions there for him. And we know historically he is a brilliant FPL asset. So 5.3 points per game for Vardy, 4 points per game for Harry Kane. Again, very difficult to understand this one based on that, just because we know managerial change for Harry Kane has meant that his points per game, just to give you an example, over the last, let's say from game week 22, has bumped up to 6.1. So it is worth noting that we are looking from game week 1 here, just to get a clear example, because Jamie Vardy, of course, has been injured for so long. So looking at the touch heat map here for Jamie Vardy, bloody hell, has he had a lot of kickoffs in his touch heat map. But no surprises here that the contrast in the two players. If I was to blindfold you, not blindfold you, of course, blindfold the names, and I said to you, one of these Harry Kane's touch heat map, one of them is Jamie Vardy's, you know exactly which one is Jamie Vardy's. All of those touches being in and around the penalty box, very limited touches. Harry Kane, on the other hand, all action forward, being all over the pitch, as we know, being a playmaker, being a winger, being a forward, being a poacher, everything he does a lot. But what we know about Jamie Vardy, fox in the box, and he gets goals, which is so important to that Leicester team, is something they have been missing in his absence. Now, again, very difficult for us to get an understanding about the underlying stats here because Kane and Vardy have played such differing minutes. But what I do like to see here is the average statistics per 90, because although their minutes have been differing, this obviously averages out for us to give a direct comparison between the two. And we see Jamie Vardy in the goals department, 0.67 goals per 90 compared to Harry Kane's 0.35. But the expected goals, the shot volume and the shots on target do go in Harry Kane's favour. And I'm not surprised by that at all. For those that played FPL for a long time know that Harry Kane is a shot volume monster. Jamie Vardy, on the other hand, a little bit less, much more of a clinical finisher. And as we know, historically, his expected goals has always been less than his actual output, kind of just like showing his class in finishing. Harry Kane, on the other hand, always does well in the shot volume department and usually in the expected goals department as well. The expected assists, again, with Harry Kane being so prominent in the whole pitch, his expected assists are naturally higher than Jamie Vardy's at 0.21 to Jamie Vardy's 0.09. So for your question for game week 30, I really think these two are going to be really important assets to own. You can't own both. I don't think the team structure allows you to have both unless you're free hitting in game week 30. But I think if you want to move early doors for either one of these two players, I really do think that there's a great opportunity for it. And I think Jamie Vardy in particular, as a differential captain for game week 30, could prove to be an amazing FPL move. I think it's something that I would love to consider. I just don't think I can necessarily get my team there easily. Otherwise, I absolutely would consider it against Brentford in game week 30. Let me know, guys. Is Jamie Vardy on your radar? Is he somebody who's completely disappeared off that radar? Let me know. I think he's someone that we should be considering for sure. Lungs is saying, is Mount a reliable pick this week? I think that Chelsea offensive assets are very difficult to pinpoint right now. I just think there's rotation there for Tuchel. I probably wouldn't go down the route of Chelsea offensive assets personally. Christian's saying, I've only got 8 players for the blank game week. Is that worth a free hit? Or should I just roll next week and be happy with 10 next game week? I really don't think that 8 players in game week 30 is a bad move at all. I personally think you don't need to panic there. If you are looking to hold your free hit a little bit longer, I think you can negotiate a way through the coming game weeks, use your free transfers to build a team for game week 30. So I think you're fine there. Don't panic at all. There's plenty of assets available. We can obviously help you out along the way. Ash is saying Willock, Fraser or Romeo. So I think based on Newcastle assets, I think it's going to be really interesting for us to look at the algorithm points, because I think in particular, we know they got a double in game week 28 and a double in game week 29, but they don't feature in game week 30. So I want to just look in particular at the midfielders for game weeks 28 and 29. In particular, Willock versus Ryan Fraser. Now, we can see here, both players, doing okay based on our algorithm points. Willock, 12.9 projected points. Fraser, 11.4. So not too dissimilar between both of those. Now, we know Fraser is a little bit cheaper at 5.3 million. Willock, 5.7. And Willock's probably been the one in a little bit more vein of form. Few goals in his last few appearances. But I think it might be worthwhile for you guys. I don't have it pre-planned, I apologise, so I will get it up in front of us now. A player heat map comparison between the two players, as I think it is worthwhile for a discussion. So if I just quickly bring up the Newcastle pair, give me 2 seconds. We'll bring up Fraser, who is going to be on the left-handed side touch heat map. And we're going to bring up Willock, who is going to be on the right-handed side. Now, again, first and foremost, let's have a look at both of them over the course of the season so far, and then we can refine it for the last 5 game weeks. So I think that's when Ryan Fraser probably started to get game time in the team alongside Willock, and I think that's going to give us a bit more of a, probably more recency understanding of where they're at. So I think that's probably worthwhile. But first and foremost, 2.8 points per game for both of them over the course of the season so far. Willock's play a little bit more minutes, but again, this is based on per game, so that's not skewing it too much. Now again, looking at the touch heat map, Fraser is getting plenty more touches in that final third, and importantly, is on set pieces for Newcastle, which is something I really do think we should consider when we are comparing the two. You can see that being the prominent corner kick taker, and in particular, with Trippier's absence as well, it's worth noting. I think that's going to put even more emphasis on Ryan Fraser being the set piece taker in this Newcastle team. So I do think that is something worth considering. Joe Willock, on the other hand, as we know from an FPL perspective and in real life, much more of a box-to-box midfielder, making those late runs into the box, which I think he started to get back into his game over the last few game weeks. Ryan Fraser, as we know, basically just a natural winger getting the balls in the box. Unfortunately, Chris Wood hasn't been converting any of those opportunities that have been created over the recent weeks, but we would like to think if Chris Wood can hit the ground running again, Ryan Fraser is definitely going to be at hand for him there. So coming down here again to the underlying stats, again, I think it's worthwhile looking at the average statistics per 90 because they have played quite similar at differing minutes. And we can see there that Willock is winning in a lot of the departments right now. 0.12 goals per 90 compared to Ryan Fraser's 0.08. Expected goals in Willock's favour. Shots in Willock's favour, but very close in these departments. None of these are actually really running away with it, where I think that's a glaring, obvious pick to go for that asset. And as we discussed, while Willock's probably offering the goal threat, Fraser is winning the department from the assist potential. And again, we would expect that with him being the set piece taker and of course an out and out winger that is getting those balls in the box. 0.16 goal assists and 0.14 expected assists per 90. So it's very difficult to come to conclusions here based on these two because they play very differing roles in this Newcastle team. And if we were to look for both of those from, let's say, game week 21 to game week 27 so far, we can get a real idea on how they've done recently. And you can see both have performed a lot better over the shorter term. 5.8 points per game for Willock, 5 points per game for Ryan Fraser. And again, when we look at the touch heat map, again, sample size is quite small, but the theme continues here. Ryan Fraser operating on those wide areas, very few touches in and around the box, in particular in front of goal, and taking those corners in Trippier's absence in particular. Willock, on the other hand, as we can expect, operating in and around the middle part of the pitch, but getting those touches in and around the penalty box with those late runs that we are starting to become accustomed to with Willock. And again, when we come down here into the general underlying stats for both players, you can see 2 goals for Willock, 1 for Ryan Fraser, and the expected goals is in Willock's favour as well, quite considerably at 1.74. Shots on target and shots on the box in Willock's favour, but again, similar theme. The assist potential favours Ryan Fraser. And I think if I was to pick one asset right now, I probably would just go for Ryan Fraser. I think the underlying stats aren't necessarily so dominant in Willock's favour that I feel like he is an absolute lock hold. So therefore, I think value really does come into the discussion. And I think Ryan Fraser being that little bit cheaper on set pieces in particular is probably the route that I would go down. So let me know in the chat, Ryan Fraser or Willock, which route would you go down? I think Fraser just nicks it for me, but there is no absolute out and out obvious pick to go for. And I think with their double and then double in 29, I think you could easily go for a differential pick in one of these Newcastle assets. And I think as well, someone like Fabian Schär in that Newcastle team is not a bad move as well, getting into your side for that double-double. I think clean sheets, Newcastle have looked a little bit better, clearly, in the last few game weeks under Eddie Howe, so it's worth noting. And again, guys, if you are enjoying the stream, I see quite a few in here already. Please do try and get us to 50 likes. That's always our goal for these live streams. And I know you guys have always delivered in the previous live streams. Please, please, please hit that like if you haven't already to show your love, basically. Okay, so that was kind of the hot topics that I really wanted to cover, guys. I hope that has helped. Please do drop any questions you have or any hot topics or comparisons that you want to see. We'll get that covered in the next 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will wrap up this live stream. So I want to make sure we cover all of the topics that you guys have in mind. So please do drop anything you have. And if it's something that we can really utilize, the tools that we have at our disposal, please do drop it in and I will try and incorporate that. And I see you guys who haven't let me down once again, over 50 likes. I really do appreciate it. Thank you. So what Ed's saying about Fraser or Willock, really hope that's helped you there, buddy. I think that probably has gone into a bit more detail and hopefully that's confirmed some decisions that you had there. Michael saying, am I crazy for not bringing in Salah this week on a wild card? I plan to bring him in game week 29. Well, Michael, I think the thing with Mo Salah, and this goes to any sort of transfer strategy that you have, first and foremost, I appreciate he has a single game week in game week 28 against West Ham. So you're probably looking at the double game weekers and thinking, I probably could go for someone who's got more games, higher FPL potential. But we know that FPL and football in general is so unpredictable. And I would say to you that you could get yourself in a situation where, yes, you could have Salah lined up in game week 29, but you could get back-to-back injuries in your team, which is going to hinder you and mean you have to bring in Mo Salah for almost a points hit. So I'm personally not a big fan of almost pre-planning transfers because it's so difficult to predict what is going to happen. In an ideal world, your wildcard team doesn't get any injuries and you can easily bring in Mo Salah for the double. Then that is the ideal world. And that's not saying that isn't going to happen. I'm just saying, just be a little bit cautious that unpredictable things can happen out of your control. And it might mean that the obvious move of Mo Salah into your team might become a little bit skewed if that does happen. So just have that in the back of your mind. But I'm not against it. I just think the sooner you can bring in Mo Salah, the better, really. Magical bucket list, what a name. Play Ramsdale or Foster for this game week. Well, this would be a really good chance for me just to keep the algorithm points on the screen for you guys. And let's get game week 28 in isolation. And let's look at the goalkeepers in particular. And no surprise, Sarr and Mendy leading the way as we expect with their double game weeks. And Dubravka, for those managers that played their wildcard a little bit earlier and are going for their bench boost option, I saw a lot of people go for Sarr and Dubravka. I'm personally one of those. That's really appealing to see that 10 points predicted for Sarr and 8.4 for Dubravka probably supports the argument of going for your bench boost this game week. But looking at the two that you mentioned, I believe you said Fraser, Forster, and just got to remind myself here, and Ramsdale, we can see that Foster actually projected to score 6.1 points, Ramsdale 4.8. So if you're looking to play a particular goalkeeper, then Foster probably is the route to go for because of that double game week that they have. So hopefully that answers that question for you there, buddy. James covered that one. Hussein, wow, guys, apologies. I see there's quite a lot of questions here, so I'm going to try and absolutely rattle through them because I appreciate I ramble on a little bit too much. Okay, Hussein say Walker-Peters and Bowen should start for England. Absolutely agree. Not necessarily start, but should get an opportunity in that team for sure. One thing I would say about Walker-Peters, we are blessed in the fullback department in this England team, so I think it might be a little bit more difficult for him to get that game time. Colm saying Jimenez in for DC out is currently my only transfer, but I'm looking at Laporte out for James or Rudiger for a -4, leaning towards James as I think he might score more in 2 games than Rudiger in 3. I think that is wise words there. I think that's exactly the sort of mentality that managers should have. Assume that Rudiger is going to play larger amount of minutes, but if you did tune in earlier to that 10-15 minute section that I did cover about Chelsea assets, Reece James over the longer term, if he continues the trend that he was on, is going to outscore Rudiger based on those attacking stats alone. So I think if you have that mindset and you go for that route, I think Reece James is a wise move there for you for sure. George, should I free hit in 30 and bench boost game week 36? Or bench boost this week and free hit 36 as I have a decent bench from my wildcard in game week 24? George, I think if your squad is ready to go for game week... apologies, should I bench boost? Okay, yep. If your squad is ready, raring to go for a bench boost this week, I would probably go for the bench boost personally. I think sometimes you just have to play what's in front of you. It's very unpredictable right now, the fixtures going forward. I think if the bench boost is available to you, I would just go for it personally. Colm said I took Cancelo out for James. Don't mind it. Of course, we know Cancelo is a monster FPL asset, but hopefully that does deliver for you. Ash is saying Vardy instead of Kane on a free hit. I think, not sure how much Leeds will improve in such little time. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think we are expecting Leeds to have a bit of an upturn naturally, as they always do, but how quickly is that going to come into fruition? I'm not too sure. All I think is Rafinha from that Leeds team is going to still be the talisman in that team. Anthony saying Dennis or Foden. Well, based on our underlying algorithm stats here, we can see that Phil Foden isn't appearing on the first list, which is shouldn't be a surprise because they're single game week. Phil Foden projected to score 4.1 points. And if you had to ask me right now, will he start in game week 28? I cannot predict Pep Guardiola, but I personally think he would start game week 28. Got the goal in game week 27 to win that game. I think he is probably their best false 9 right now. I think Foden probably is the go-to option. So Foden at 4.1, I believe. Dennis at 5.9. So because of that double game week for Dennis, I think it's very difficult to ignore it. And I think it's why you're probably asking yourself, why do I still have Dennis? Why do I still have Dennis? And with a double being presented in front of you, I think this is the brilliant time to play him. It's almost a swan song for Dennis. Then you can start to ship him out if he has annoyed you to the extent that he has annoyed a lot of managers in the past. So I think Dennis probably just nicks it, but we have to appreciate that Foden is still a brilliant option. Vish was saying, reason for keeping Cancelo. Sorry, I just joined if you've already talked about it. We haven't necessarily discussed Cancelo in loads of detail. I think the real thing about Cancelo is absolutely no denying that he's a phenomenal FPL asset. I think we just have to look at the double game weeks we have available to us. And I think you look at the likes of Chelsea and the likes of Liverpool and think to yourself, there's probably potential there for them to not only outscore Cancelo, but just match him. And I think at his price point in Cancelo, with Reece James being 1 million cheaper, it can then free up funds elsewhere to upgrade the rest of your squad. I think that's probably just the argument. There's no denying that Cancelo is a phenomenal FPL asset at all. Chris saying, why is Thiago Silva flagged? That's a really good point, and I'm not actually too sure why he is flagged. Let's go into the thing here. So we can see that the good thing about the Fantasy Football Fix website is we draw in all the information from press conferences, quotes, etc. And we can see the availability here is that Trevor Chalobah and Thiago were back in training yesterday and seem fine to go. So although I don't think he's necessarily a doubt, just slightly flagged because obviously he was raised in a press conference and Tuchel has confirmed that they seem fine to go. Obviously that puts a little bit of a question mark, but I personally think Thiago Silva will be available. So it's a good spot there about Thiago Silva. You can see Azpilicueta also flagged, but we know that he hasn't returned to full training yet. So that is why he is flagged and definitely is going to be out for it. And I see Tom there has covered that there. Apologies, Tom, for bloody copying that there. I should have read that in advance. Mohamed, what about Sa? Will he play? No, Sa is too much of a rotation risk. I would not consider him at all. Will agree James is a better pick, but who would I take out? I guess VVD, then move to Jota, 29 possibly. Okay, guys, so I did mention I was going to say it earlier. I think it's going to be really valuable for you guys. What I'm going to do right now is look at the projected points for defenders over the longer term. Now, the reason I'm going to do this is because naturally, I think a lot of people, myself included, is looking at game week 28 double and being drawn in by the Chelsea fixtures away to Burnley and away to Norwich. And naturally, seeing Van Dijk in particular with a home fixture against West Ham, yes, clean sheet is definitely a potential there. But, you know, the double potential clean sheet of Rudiger is the temptation there. But then we have to remember that Liverpool then have a double game week in 29. I just want to remind you guys here of that in front of you. Game week 28 to 30. Based on it here, game week 29, we have the double for Liverpool, Brighton away and Arsenal away. And of course, Chelsea and Liverpool blank in game week 30. So whichever direction you go in, you will fall on a player that blanks in game week 30, which is worth noting. So you're not going to have the dream player from Liverpool or Chelsea that play in the next 3 game weeks. Now, of course, you could do the hokey cokey. You could jump on Rudiger for game week 28 and capitalise on that double game week. Then go to Van Dijk, back to Van Dijk, for example, in game week 29 when he doubles. But I think that's a waste of your free transfer. So I think we need to look at a little bit longer term. And that's when the projected points come really in handy when we do look at it longer term. So first and foremost, over the next 3 game weeks, defender perspective, we can see there that, of course, the Wolves defenders are leading the way. And that's to be expected because they do have a game week in 30. Trent Alexander-Arnold, based on the defenders, is top of the tree for those that blank in game week 30. You can see there 15.8, no surprises there whatsoever. And Thiago Silva on 14.8. But interestingly, because I know a lot of people are discussing it right now, Tony Rudiger, 13.9 projected points. Van Dijk, on the other hand, 12.1. So it's very much a case of what route you want to go down, really. I think if you're sat there with Van Dijk and you want to bring in Rudiger, that's your move. I don't think you can go Van Dijk to Rudiger, back to Van Dijk to capitalise on game week 29. I think you need to isolate game week 28 and game week 29 and think to yourself, which game week double do I prefer? And I think on the face of it, naturally, Chelsea's double away to Burnley and Norwich is better than Brighton and Arsenal away for Liverpool. So I think that's definitely something we need to consider when we look at it. I don't think you can go back to Rudiger and then back to Van Dijk. I don't think that's a good strategy. Now, when we look a bit longer term, up to game week 33, and again, take this with a pinch of salt because there will be game weeks that get dropped in with additional fixtures. We need to note that. When we look at the underlying projected points here, we can see Rudiger still leading the way against Van Dijk. Rudiger with 27.7 and Van Dijk on 24.4. So to answer the question about should you do the likes of Van Dijk to Rudiger, Thiago Silva's, etc., etc., I think it's very much a case of where's your team structure right now. Speaking on somebody who has Van Dijk and Trent, I personally am at a little bit of a crossroads right now. I think the move to Rudiger is definitely a better option for game week 28. There's no doubt about it. But then equally, Chelsea at home to Newcastle while Liverpool have a double in game week 29. You'd want the Liverpool asset there. So I think you need to accept whatever direction you go in, that is what you hold longer term. And I think based on it, I think the move, if you were going to make, is Van Dijk to Reece James. And the reason being I say that is because you're going to be bringing in an asset longer term if you're not going to be doing the whole hokey-cokey between the assets. And I think Reece James just offers that attacking potential that Van Dijk or Rudiger don't offer. So doing Van Dijk to Rudiger almost feels like a sideways move where you're replacing a very similar FPL asset with another. Whereas Reece James, I believe, is in the Cancelo and Trent Alexander-Arnold kind of stratosphere. So I think if you are going to do the Van Dijk move, I think you probably would go to the Reece James option just to really capitalise on that Chelsea defence, but also that attacking potential that he does offer going forward. Because we can see here on the projected points, Reece James still coming out well on 26.7. And I personally, going against the algorithm a little bit here, would back Reece James to outscore Rudiger over the longer term if his minutes do remain. So let me know in the chat, guys, what are your thoughts on jumping from a Liverpool asset to a Chelsea player this game week? I personally think it's an okay move, but I would go for Reece James if I was jumping from a Van Dijk to somebody down that route there. Now, guys, I'm going to answer a few more questions, and then I think we're going to wrap it up here because we've been going for over an hour. I appreciate you guys have plenty to do on your Friday nights. So let's try and rattle through the last few of these questions. So, Cows and Holes, what a name. What do you think about Lukaku as a free hit option? Not a big fan. Not a big fan personally. I think first and foremost his game time's at risk with Havertz. I think that's worth noting first and foremost. And if you're talking about a free hit this week, I think it's still so difficult to look past the likes of Kane, for example. So yes, Lukaku could have a double, but I'd argue he might not even feature in both games. So no, I think it's too much to invest in that team. Samo saying, hi, what do you think Ward-Prowse captain wouldn't be top of my agenda right now. However, if you want a player that is guaranteed to play 180 minutes in game week 28, then he is definitely your man. But I think the likes of Rafinha, the likes of Coutinho, even the likes of Salah would probably still be the temptation for me over Ward-Prowse. Stump Dragon, what a name. Thoughts on my -12. Edouard de Broha, like that move. Semedo to Rudiger. I like Semedo to Rudiger, but it's worth noting that you will then be getting rid of a player that features in game week 30. Then Cucurella to Saiz, you'll be gaining a player who plays in game week 30, and then Bowen to Rafinha, and then bench boost. Don't mind that move at all. I think you're gaining yourself a game week 30 team in advance, and the bench boost option, I think you will capitalise on. Just be cautious that you effectively playing the -12 could kind of rule out your bench boost, so you're just going to be playing your bench boost to cancel out your points hit, so just be conscious of that. Torji saying Bowen to Coutinho for a -4. Not huge on that for a -4 personally, but if you go Coutinho, I'll be tempted to captain him if you are going to do that route. I'm saying for game week 28 wildcard, Kane and Saka or Son and Laka, I would go for Kane and Saka first and foremost. I think that's quite a clear one. Dubravka or Forster, I would go for Dubravka of the two. Willock or Martinelli or Kulusevski, I think I would go down the... really tricky there. I think if you've got Kane already, I'd probably go down the Willock route. I think that's a really close one though. And then Robertson or Jota as a third Liverpool player, I would go for Robertson. I hope that helps. Colin, was Jimenez dropped or... Apologies, that's gone. Or just rested? Jimenez, he could be either the absolute hero of game week 28 or the villain. It is going to be so touch and go. We think that it was just a bit of rotation for Wolves, him testing out new things in that front three. Oh my God, guys, if Jimenez doesn't play in game week 28, there's going to be absolute pitchforks at his house. That is for sure. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens here. Neil, would you suggest free hitting 30 and then a second free hit later? Yeah, I think that's a really good move, Neil. Again, it's completely team dependent. If your squad is struggling to field in game week 30, then of course, I think a free hit is really valuable in game week 30. And then you can kind of just take each game week as it comes when we get later down the season with your second free hit. CDM Bluebird, people seem to forget that Reece James went several weeks prior injury blanking weekly. Yes, he absolutely killed those managers that did pile into him. I do think that he was a killer, but he's still a phenomenal asset. Underlying stats are still great. Colbin saying, can you talk about Hover versus Cody/Kilman? Yeah, Hover's coming out really good on our algorithm points recently, obviously with the injury to, I believe, Ait-Nouri. So as we can see here over the next 3 game weeks, we can see there Hover, I believe it's that, 17.9 projected points. Cody, 17.7. Kilman, 17.1. Now, is Hover, I believe it's pronounced, going to get guaranteed minutes? I don't actually know. I'm unfortunately not as clued in on the Wolves backup players. If he is, though, at 3.9 million, if you're doing a wild card, you want a cheap option that you're happy that could get benched week in, week out, brilliant option. You can see that on our algorithm points. Just depends on the long-term injury for Ait-Nouri, is worth noting. Right, guys, I think that is going to wrap up this live stream. I apologize if I haven't gotten to all the questions here. Again, we have plenty in here, and I really appreciate you guys tuning in for what seems to be about an hour 15 live stream. So I really do appreciate you guys tuning in. Hopefully we've answered plenty of your questions, and fingers crossed we have just, resolved some of those hot topic issues. So as always, rewind this live stream. If you want to look at Chelsea defenders, you want to look at Kane versus Vardy, we want to look at some of the best options that you can bring in for this game week. And importantly, if you're wildcarding, I really recommend rewinding this live stream, checking out the Elite 11, tuning into that, because some of the best managers in the world have activated their wildcard, and you can see how yours compares to one another. So if you haven't already, guys, please do drop the live stream a like. I really do appreciate it. Hit that subscribe button as well. We're dropping content daily, and we really do appreciate the support. 72 likes a video. Can we get it to 100? I'd really appreciate that, guys. So if you haven't already, please do check out Fantasy Football Fix website. Upload your squad for free. Check out all of our amazing tools that are available for free. And I really recommend checking out our premium membership. All the tools that you see in here are part of that package, and it's made me personally a much better FPL manager, floating around the 5k, and I definitely wouldn't be there without Fantasy Football Fix. So big shout out to them. So I will see you guys in the next live stream. Remember, deadline is tomorrow. Do not miss it, and take care, guys. Have a great game week, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.